that set of presentations and that sweep of research is really inspiring, informative, and most of all hopeful, I think, which is something that is a great thing to be having on a Friday afternoon. We do actually have a few minutes to ask questions of this terrific panel. And I believe that someone may have a wireless mic, Vicki does, so wait for that. And when you get it, I already see the young lady in the black top and the gentleman here. When you get it, please say who you are and where you're from, and do ask a question and indicate if you're directing it to anyone specific.
My name is Sadie O. White, and I'm a retired educator who likes to just keep on track for future work. And this panel really has me inspired, and it's really open to anyone who feels they want to respond to. If I'm to relax my assumption and rethink quality teaching, which is skills, content, and training, and then to understand that teacher effectiveness improves over time, and then to know that why teachers leave, it's not about the kids, then this discussion has serious implications for schools that are high poverty and are at risk. Because if they say it's not about the kids, it's the environment. What would it take for teachers to feel a collective empowerment to stand their ground and build collaboration and improve the quality of teaching where they are? And then it has more serious implications on leadership, because what the teachers are saying that it's about leadership, because that's the school environment. So what would school leadership selection and training look like? And could it be possible that future, moving forward, that the leadership wouldn't necessarily be administration and supervision, but leadership would come from the teacher ranks to continue this collaboration and growth?
Thank you. Who wants to? Looks like Susan's going to grab
crack at it. I think you answered your own question all along there, so that is great. I have studied teachers for over 35 years, and I always end up saying, what about the principal? Because it really, if that doesn't work and the principal has the authority, that's a real challenge. So I think the selection, really the selection, but the training and selection of principals is key. I don't know why we don't have more expert teachers becoming principals. I mean, I know why they might not want to do it, but the whole notion of teacher leaders, expert teachers, administrative teams, there's a lot of organizational strength within a school. So I don't think you can pin it on one individual, the principal, but if the principal is not a good instructor, not committed to learning, not inclusive, but sort of treats teachers more instrumentally, as we have written, then I think it's extremely hard to do.
Anyone else want to pipe in on that one? Okay, thank you. Move to our next question.
This is for John about his Tennessee study. When you match those,
can you say who you are as well?
My name is Steve Kramer. I'm from the 21st Century Partnership for STEM Education up in Pennsylvania. For John, in the Tennessee study, did you just say you guys are a pair, or did you say you guys are a pair and you have all this extra planning time and extra money?
It's a good question. We basically just said you guys are a pair, and we provided some minimal guidance about what teachers could do together. So we said you should, we encourage you to set goals. We encourage you to set goals for your partnership. We encourage you to create an action strategy. We encourage you to observe each other teaching, things like that. But we did not. There was no money. Neither teachers on either side, nobody got money for this. We did talk to principals and said principals could provide, we encourage principals to provide support for this if they wanted to, but there was no expectation that principals do that. And we found that some principals did. They provided for coverage for release time for teachers to go observe each other, and other principals did not do that. And so, but there was one of the things that we went into this enterprise to do was to develop an intervention that was very low cost for schools, right? We realized that telling schools, oh, what you need to do is invest thousands and thousands of dollars to hire coaches to come in and work with folks wouldn't fly. And so we were trying to leverage that expertise within schools, and that was something that resonated with what the state wanted to do as well.
Great, thank you. Lady in the front.
Karen DeMoss from Bank Street College, working on sustainable funding for quality teacher preparation. Thank you, Matthew Ronfeld, for taking a look at the preparation side. I'm wondering if any of your other data sets have information about the length of the clinical pre-service practice, where you might be able to run the same analyses to see whether or not there's a differential, sort of that first year, huge learning curve. If we can find out if there's a differential on that first year learning curve, we can start to move the needle on the question of quick entry programs. Do you have any of that data available?
So am I right that the question is about the length of student teaching is what you're mostly interested in?
Right, so quick entry, regular student teaching, and long
Yeah, so I've looked at length of student teaching in a few different studies, and the duration of student teaching, my general conclusion, is not nearly as important as the placement school, the context of the school. I have tried to do some interaction models, like I think you're suggesting, to look to see whether or not some combination of the length duration of student teaching might, in sort of interactions with the school placement, predict greater gains than other cases. I haven't been able to find that. I expected that myself. That doesn't mean that it couldn't exist. There's some limitations to the work I've been able to do. I've looked at a variety of different outcomes when I've done this work. So I have seen effects of length of or duration of student teaching. Even though I argued just a minute ago, I don't feel it's as strong as climate and other things like the rate of teacher churn in schools. I have found that the duration of student teaching does predict things. I did a study with Brian Jacob at the national level using nationally representative data that showed that the duration of student teaching does predict teacher retention, and that it doesn't. Then I've looked in another case where we looked at teachers' feelings of readiness to teach, and have seen effects there. Where I didn't see effects was on teachers' value added after they graduated. I found no real effects or very minor effects. I think it's a rich site to keep looking at. I think one of the challenges is really getting a good measure for length of student teaching. Really the only way I've had success in my prior work in New York City, we tried to ask. We went through the we did program review of documents that the teacher prep programs had online to try to figure out how long the student teaching experience is. That's a terrible proxy because we actually also surveyed all the student teachers who went through those programs and found, if the program said 10 weeks, well, we found some that did 5, some that did 30. So you really need to go and ask the student teachers themselves. And then when you ask them, well, how do you ask the question? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it hours per day? Because everybody does there's such a variety of ways of trying to get at this. So I'm continually trying to get at this stuff. And I do think, though, your hypothesis that some amount of duration in combination with the quality of placement is probably a good bet, but I haven't been able to find it yet.
Great. Just before we go to the next question, I want to give the panelists a fair warning that when we have about 5 minutes left, which is about 5 minutes from now, I'm going to go a final whip and ask you something on the order of this. So I figure that the people in this room are kind of at the intersection of research, policy, and practice in education. And as we close in a little bit from now, I'd like you to think about the one takeaway you want to leave with this group or the one direction you want to point folks in about positive things that they should be advocating for. So we'll come back to that when we get there. And now we have a question.
Okay, so I have a question for John again. I think the idea of partnering the teachers based on their effectiveness was really interesting, again, with the idea of the high and the low. But I'm curious, from your data, do you have a sense about what the high quality teachers got from those collaborations? I'm not sure if your quantitative data had that analysis or you had some additional qualitative data to answer that.
Yeah, so I'll get to your question in a second. I do want to be clear that what we did, I think I talked about this too fast as high and low performing. I want to be clear that this is about specific instructional skills. So we were trying to be very clear that this was not, high performing teachers and low performing teachers, but folks who struggled in certain areas of practice matched with peers who had skills in those specific areas. We don't have, our sample size was not large enough to try and really quantitatively estimate what the impact was on those sort of higher performing partners. We didn't find, we found that they improved, but not, it was hard to tell whether it was because of their participation in these partnerships. In other work with Susan, we found, we studied peer assistance and review programs, and we found teachers who are working as consulting teachers in those programs, a very different model, but still teachers who were involved in those sort of roles, working with lower performing teachers who spoke at length about the things that they were learning and gaining when they went back to the classroom. And we did a small qualitative component of our partnership study, and we heard similar things. Folks saying, oh, I learned something from working with my partner, either about the fact that they had to teach someone else how to do a practice that they sort of knew implicitly but couldn't really articulate, or actually learning some direct skills. Some of the partners felt uncomfortable working with a colleague who struggled in certain areas, and so they actively sought out things where the partner could teach them. For example, we had a pair who said the higher performing teacher said they weren't very good at using technology in the classroom, and so the lower performing teacher taught them how to use PowerPoint. And the higher performing teacher taught the lower performing teacher how to do other things that they thought were useful.
Joe.
Joe Anderson. I wanted to follow up with Susan. You mentioned the importance of the principal and the quality of principal leadership, but that wasn't one of the 3 factors in the UN capital system across those 6 schools. What was the thinking there?
Well, the three systems that we focused on were not, these were not factors. They were actually systemic programs within the schools, and the principals were very engaged in each one of them. And I think I spoke a bit about their role in hiring, their involvement in teams, and certainly their central role in supervision and evaluation. So it was, I guess my emphasis is thinking about inside a school, not just what one thing has some big effect, but when systems work, when things seem to be going well, how are these different parts interacting? And again, the principal's understanding of those components and support for them, both implicitly and explicitly, was very important. That make sense, Joe?
I think we probably have time for one more question, if there is one, before we go to our closing comments. Going once. All right, well, that gives you approximately 1 minute and 20 seconds then to leave your final thought. Sorry, thank you very much. Okay, 60.5 seconds. And again, the takeaway that you want to leave folks with as we go out into our own worlds of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, based on what you shared with us this afternoon. I'm going to start with Susan and come back and end with John.
Okay, I think mine will be very quick. You have heard a consistent, story. We haven't fought up here about who has it right. There's a lot of emphasis on the importance of context. I would just like to remind you that the other 15,000 research education people in this city right now do not necessarily agree, and that this perspective on both how's it going and how to make it better is one that you have to keep kind of thinking about and promoting.
So I think in my work on teacher collaboration, I think it's a sort of a happy story. It's one where I think policymakers and practitioners actually kind of see eye to eye on that teacher collaboration is something that everybody at this point, or I shouldn't say everybody, a good share of people are starting to believe in. And I think the evidence supporting it now, both, so just by way of background, I did a lot of work at the practitioner level as a teacher, working and developing teacher collaborations as a practitioner, and then now zooming this up to these large-scale quantitative studies, sort of just say what I already knew, which is that collaboration makes a difference. But I think the more evidence that we can sort of put out there to policymakers that this is indeed the case, the better. And then secondly, my point I already made, which is that building partnerships between teacher ed programs and districts to find ways to identify these promising schools and work together to use these to place our student teachers to learn to teach, I think is a really critical next step.
Thank you.
Yeah, so first I'll
just sort of echo Susan's point about the fact that I think the perspective that context matters is not one that is shared among many researchers and policymakers. So insofar as we can make it more forcefully and using the language that they find appealing, I think that's going to be helpful. So the other thing, last thing I'd say is that I think one takeaway that I think is important is that first, of course, the context does matter quite a bit, and that the other teachers that are in the room or in the same building are a resource that can be leveraged for improving the quality of instruction. And I think that in order to really make that point, we have to think about ways in which to, I guess, create professional development interventions that are going to best make use of that. I don't know that all the ones that exist now are necessarily as effective as they could be. I think a lot more research needs to be done in collaboration with researchers and practitioners, demonstrating those that are going to be most effective at promoting test scores and other outcomes that can be taken to policymakers to make sure this stuff is adopted widespread.
I think what makes this gathering so particularly special is that when you look around, it's really an integrated group of policymakers, practitioners, and researchers. Most of us usually get up in front of rooms of other researchers and kind of talk to the echo chamber, and we don't have the opportunity to exchange ideas with the people doing the hard work on the ground and those making the policy. And so my closing comments are kind of for each of these camps to think about how we could push ourselves to further this work. For policymakers, I think it's often a knee-jerk reaction to look to research, but primarily to affirm the view that you brought to an issue rather than to kind of question or challenge your views. And so I would encourage folks to look to research with an open mind around what the evidence might suggest about our effective ways forward. For practitioners, particularly to share your best practices outside of your school walls in your districts, that really learning from peers is the key to change in a super decentralized system. And that means reaching out to researchers to help affirm the work that you're doing and to document why it works so that people can learn from it. And to the researchers, building on what Susan has pointed out, that since the action is in the schools, and it's beholden to ask questions that are relevant to the people in the schools and to co-construct those questions so that what we're doing is not so isolated and kind of introspective that it's, regardless of what we find, it doesn't matter for practitioners on the ground.
I guess I'd say that one thing that I've heard here is that all of us in some way or another are talking about teacher development, right? And how these practices and policies can lead teachers to improve over time. And I hope that we can start to shift the conversation in terms of evaluating policies to focus on development, right? So if we think about evaluation, we've spent an awful lot of time and money trying to assess whether evaluation systems are unbiased or assess whether we're rating accurately or not. And I certainly think those things are important. But in my mind, they're not as important as saying, does this system help teachers improve? Or is this system useful for raising student achievement and improving student achievement? And I think those are the questions that we haven't been answering as much. We've been trying to get more into the, seeing these things as measures rather than seeing the measures as tools for teacher improvement. So I hope that we continue to move in that direction.
This has been an absolutely fascinating, engaging, and again, hopeful hour and a half. I think you all have earned a coffee break, but this terrific panel, I think you're going to get one too, has very much earned our gratitude. So thank you all so much for a terrific conversation.